Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm gonna sort of talk slowly through the first part of the intro that we always do because there's still a few people jumping on. So I'll just sort of stretch for a second and let everybody get here while I introduce the second item on our agenda, which is a motion to approve a special rule limiting each speaker to 2 minutes each time they're recognized. A 2/3 majority of those present and voting is required to approve the special rule. Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing none, host, if you could please initiate the poll.
Give about another 10 seconds if you wish to vote.
Excuse me, where do we need to vote? So
There should be a poll brought up right in the Zoom platform.
thank you.
And last call. There being 114 ayes, 3 nays, and 2 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 3 is addresses administrative responses to the University Senate actions and is normally presented for information, but there are no responses pending at this time. Item 4 is a list of faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been forwarded for announcement to the Senate. I invite and encourage you to observe a moment of silence while I read these names. Betty Ige, Brent Anderson, Kim Anderson, Frederick Asher, Jeffrey Barker, Adele Dunchenko, Kevin Ehrman Solberg, Gerald Erickson, Evelyn Franklin, William Gleason, Glenn Harris, Joyce Hegstrom, Roger Hook, Kadri Ismail, Floris King, David Churchnopf, Miroslav Kondika, Jessica Lindley Curtis, Sharon Ling, Carl Malmquist, Judith McCall, Michael Michelin, Larry Miller, Robert Miller, Stephen Miller, Sarah Ojard, Bernadelle Olson, Claire Olson, Walter Petrikowski, Maria Pindaro, Virginia Provencher, Craig Sandler, Henry Schumer, Andrea Scott, Yasukata Saibuya, Larry Skoglund, Cheryl Smolnikar, Bert Stromberg Jr., Mary Suk, Deborah Swackhammer, James Turman, Gilberto Vasquez Valle, Melkisa Waltaji, Harry Watts, Derek Zarling, and with our students, Abigail Anderson, Tristan Kotlicki, and Aiden Zent. Thank you. Item 5 is our Senate orientation. I will invite Professor Ned Patterson to present this item. Ned?
Thank you, President Gable. If we could get the slides shared. We're going to talk a little bit about Senate orientation. Just some of you have been on the Senate for many years, some have been are new, and we want to just make sure everybody's on the same page. So in your docket items, there's a link to 10 items about the University Senate, and I'm going to go over certain ones in some detail. I am not seeing the slides, but I think sometimes how this works, they may be being projected. Are they being projected yet?
Yep, just 1 second there, Ned. I'll put them up.
Okay, thank you. And one thing I'll note, thank you, President Gable. President Gable is chair of our Senate. So we have an unusual thing that we have the president as chair, and we'll talk a little bit more about the overall structure in just a second, as soon as Chris gets those up. Thank you. And next slide. So the general powers delegated by the Board of Regents through the Constitution indicate that the regents, for all matters related to educational and administrative affairs, in the first point there, of the university are committed to the president, the faculty senate, the university senate, and the several faculties as written in the university constitution. The president shall be representative to the external constituencies, of the regents, the university senate, the faculty senate, etc., and the students, and is the chief executive officer, and the president has the overall general administrative authority over the university, and then is also chair of the senates, although that's mainly to chair the Senate meetings. Most of the decision making within the Senate committees is with other Senate leaders and Senate committee members. And so the University Senate has general legislative authority over administrative matters concerning more than one campus of the university as a whole. So it's not intended for an issue that is specific to one campus, one unit, or one college, but you should bring forth to your appropriate consultative committee chairs or senates any issues you are encountering that involve more than one college or unit. Next slide, please. So here's the structure, and I think we have some people talking. I don't know if Chris, you might be able to mute. Somebody doesn't realize their mic's on. So here it kind of shows that structure. Here we are in yellow in the middle of the University Senate. Then it shows SCC, the Senate Consultative Committee, which is the executive and steering committee of the University Senate, of which I'm chair, and Colleen Manchester Flaherty is vice chair. And then we are also of the Faculty Consultative Committee. And then there's a chair and vice chair of each of the P&A Senate Consultative Committees, the Senate Student Senate Consultative Committee, and the Civil Service Consultative Committee. So if you have an issue that's specific to one of your senates, bring it to the Consultative Committee chairs or the staff if you're unsure, or can go to a committee chair, which we'll talk about the committees in a second. Or if you're unsure there, you could just always email senate@umn.edu. Again, and so if you look under the University Senate, the body we are right now, all the top committees report directly to the University Senate, and there's various policies and procedures that must go through those committees and to the Senate at some point. And then the ones in parentheses report to other senates primarily, but also to the Senate, like educational policies, primarily to the Faculty Senate, but also to this Senate and the Student Senate. So that's kind of the structure, and just we want to really improve communication this year and be sure where you can bring issues up to. So again, if you're not sure, but it's a specific Senate, go to your consultative committee chairs. If it's a specific Senate or a committee, one of these committees, it's educational policy, go to the chair of that committee. And if you're unsure, you can always go to the Senate staff at senate@umn.edu, email, and they can help triage where it should go. Next slide, please. So for consultation on policies, actions, and plans, there's many policies that must go through us for our advice. Again, most of our actions are advisory to the president and or the regents, depending on the case. A few educational policies, such as certain things about the curriculum and the calendar, we do in certain, the faculty senate in that case has authority, or the university senate on the calendars. And other things are advisory, but to be effective, consultation often takes time and it's proactive. Top point, it has benefits. We really want broad engagement that would increase buy-in, to have a more informed and inclusive community, to be inclusive and well considered. So while it may go to one senate or one committee, we want to have everybody that should be consulted, all the key stakeholders involved. So if there can be early consultation for issues that you have or committees have, or you bring to the consultative committees, that's always the best, and some reasonable deadlines to make sure things get done, but still there's widespread consultation between all the needed committees, constituents, and consultative committees before it comes to one of the senates eventually, potentially. And we'll go through that on the next slide. So the regular practice of effective consultation that's upfront, proactive. We bring things to the administration we're concerned about. The administration brings things to us they're working on or concerned about or want to hear our opinion. That really fosters trust among the university community, administration, and the regents, and is the most effective, really collaborative consultation and communication. Next slide, please. So here's a big flow chart. I'm not going to read every part of it, but I'm going to start kind of the top, middle, top in yellow, full consultation and discussion with the relative with the relevant administrators and stakeholders. That is where we want to start. And again, that's where you can bring things to us. We can bring things to the constituents. The administration brings us things. We bring them things. And then really, we usually decide what committee does it go into. To the right there, a draft and pass, a committee discussion and draft and pass something in a committee is where it usually starts. It could be a subcommittee of the committee. And then in that work, what kind of action is it? Is it a statement? And the committee should really look at that down a little bit. And then to the right, statement that then can be put to the committee or subcommittee, puts on the appropriate Senate agenda for information. A committee can just make an informative statement to the appropriate Senate. Or might there be a resolution that needs some action or a vote going to the left? Then it should go to it goes to the consultative committee of that Senate, who in their steering capacity sets and approves and plans all Senate committees for their various Senates to consider, should it go forward now or should it go back for further consultation? And then at some point it could go forward to the appropriate Senate towards the bottom left, put on the docket of the appropriate Senate for action. Or it could go back to committees, and really if we're doing thorough, comprehensive consultation is the plan, and then making sure which Senate it is. Then there can be a vote that's often advisory, occasionally a binding vote depending on the issue or topic, and then that can be sent to the relevant administrators to end that off. So hopefully that flow chart, all these items are in those 10 items in the link in the docket. Next slide, please. So let me just catch up with my notes. So senator responsibilities, your responsibilities, as you know, but we'll just make sure everybody's crystal clear, are to attend all meetings or have an alternate. Senators can have alternates, consultative committee members cannot. To review the docket materials before, we really want them before, so you're ready to discuss them whenever possible. And then we often, our practices whenever possible is to have review and discussion at one meeting, followed by the next regular meeting, or a few weeks later, occasionally a special meeting for additional review, discussion, and a vote to give you time to go back to your constituents and share those draft policies and amendments, so that you're truly not just representing your own voice, that we're all, in this Senate, we're all representatives of all faculty, staff, and students. In the Student Senate, you're representative of all students in that case. We really want to increased communication to bring forth to the Senate or Finance Committee issues of concerns that you have or your constituents have that, again, affect more than one unit or college of the university or campus. So again, I already said this, remember in the middle, each member of the University Senate shall represent the university as a whole. And that's where you need to consult in between meetings, ideally. And then standard rules of decorum apply at all Senate meetings, all Senate community meetings, and all emails, any communication, I would say. So one of those, and I'll go through some more on the next slide, is senators should stay on the topic being discussed. Really, we're supposed to talk about the topics in the planned agenda. If the senator goes off topic, the chair could call them out of order for not being germane. And you can always bring up new topics or something by the usual process or occasionally by new business at a meeting. But we really think the usual process of going to the right committee to start is the best practice. So next slide. So decorum and germaneness. Most people are really good about this. In the past couple of years, we've had a couple issues, so that's why we really wanted to be clear. The usual rules of germaneness and decorum shall apply. These are indicated a little bit in our Constitution, and they're also outlined in details in Robert's Rules of they're newly ordered and revised. We really want people, when we're having discussion in the Senates or the committees, to combine the remarks to the merits of the pending question. And they must be germane to that question, as I just said. We want you to refrain from criticizing members' motives. It's fine to condemn the proposed measure in strong terms in terms of what the measure means, the details, but we really want to avoid attacking or addressing personalities or the motives of others. We hopefully come from an area of trust, presuming good motives, and that, but we still can be strong on the issue that's being indicated. And then to help really be sure that everybody's heard as equally and representatively as possible, you should address all remarks to the chair. You shouldn't address one another directly. You might have a question that's for another member or one of the experts or the administrative members, but we really want the chair to kind of follow that process and maybe get a number of questions till they go to an administrator or something like that, to really, again, ensure that everybody's heard as equally and representatively as possible. So the chair really should control who's answering when, whatever, when. So you address it to the chair. It could be a question for that, and then the chair decides, do we address somebody else right away, or do we get a few questions together and then address all at once to be as efficient as possible to be sure that everybody can be heard. And in that, just again, to not be attacking personalities or members, it's nice to avoid the use of members' names. You could phrase like the member who spoke last, or if you're talking about me, the faculty senator from veterinary medicine. And so it's the duty of the presiding officer to enforce the rules relating to debate and decorum. And of course, in addition, all the student conduct code, the Regents policy of conduct would apply. And again, 98% of the time, this is all great, but we've had a few instances in Senate meetings lately where this wasn't followed well. We did follow up with those individuals, and we just wanted to really be upfront that we're all on the same page. And so I think there's one more slide, and that is it. And there's the University Senate website also. So thanks for your time and attention, and we'll turn it back to the chair of our meeting, President Gable.
Thanks, Ned. Moving on then, item 6 is approval of minutes from the April 22nd, 2021 meeting of the University and Faculty Senate meeting. Chris, if you could please initiate the poll to approve the minutes.
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote on this. And last call. There being 147 ayes, 0 nays, and 21 abstentions, this motion does prevail.
Thank you. Items 7 and 8 are the president's report, and then the questions for me. I'll give my report, and then we'll just immediately go into item 8, which are the questions. So with that, I'll wish everybody again a good afternoon, and hope everyone is well. It feels almost strange that this is the first University Senate meeting of this academic year, because the year feels like it's just started and has also been incredibly long, as these things have been throughout the pandemic. It has been a challenging year and a half or so in a lot of different ways, and with full acknowledgement of the ways in which many of us have suffered. I also extend my personal gratitude and for all the people whose position I may be representing at the moment, for your continued strength and resilience. Very grateful for everything you're navigating and the incredible quality of work you're doing at work and in navigating the very challenging balances that we're all trying to strike these days. Before we launch into the actual report, I want to welcome Professor Rachna Shah, our new University and Faculty Senate Clerk. She is a professor of supply chain and operations in the Carlson School. So welcome and thank you in advance for your partnership as we engage in all the operational steps and details and substantive work that Ned just laid out for us. So fall semester, we welcomed our largest and most diverse freshman / transfer class in many decades at the university. Lots of people to thank for that. Of course, admissions, student affairs, housing, advising, many parts of the student affairs organization, academic departments and colleges done a tremendous job welcoming these students, welcoming back our students, many of whom come with having had also a very challenging year, and that of course is not limited to undergraduate or freshman transfer, includes very much our graduate and professional students. Very grateful to everyone who makes that happen. While welcoming our new and returning students to all 5 of our campuses, we have been very focused on safety and health. Our work in response to the pandemic has continued in very much the same way as it has since the very first days. So just as some context on that, our collective community includes over 60,000 students, over 21,000 employees. We have had very few instances of COVID, and even fewer where there was any need for an intervention or attention besides being aware of the positive report. And in those very limited instances, the solutions involved providing information to those who needed assistance or support in following the public health protocols so that they work as intended, and then they in fact did. Why is this? Is because our students, faculty, and staff have been incredibly responsible in following the guidance that was developed in partnership with our public health experts on campus and our partners at MDH and with federal guidance. We see the evidence of that in the work that we've done and the results that we've received with the Get the Vax 2.0 program, which started this summer. So as of yesterday, September 29th, 81.67% of students have responded to the vaccination requirement. And of those who responded, 97.44 say that they are vaccinated. Their deadline is October 8th. Their meaning student deadline is October 8th. System-wide, 97.92% of employees have responded to the attestation requirement. And of those who responded, 94.78 have attested that they are vaccinated. But we continue to review as those responses come in. We are reviewing data on campus, and testing is a very big part of this. So on the Twin Cities campus, additional appointments are being added by Boynton Health to meet demand. The percent of positive results from the testing that is happening on campus remains very low at just under 3%. We know that there are challenges with access to testing, particularly in Rochester, because there is no state testing site available there. So we're working and advocating on behalf of, well, really the Rochester community, but in particular our campus about that. And then in Duluth, there's a very large state testing site close by and a federal testing site over the border in Superior. But in the interest of meeting faculty and staff and others' wishes to have accessibility of testing on campus, we're working with MDH to try to make that happen. MDH, or the Minnesota Department of Health, is been a very active partner with us through this entire process. They have engaged in what we sort of tongue-in-cheek call graceful pivots, in the same way that the administration has, and then all of you have had to, as the ground shifts rather continuously, with new information, good news, challenging news throughout the course of this pandemic. So some of the changes or transitions that we know are coming and that you've seen covered in particularly the Star Tribune recently wrote an article about this, is that MDH is making transitions related to how they're doing case investigations and contact tracing. So they've described this as a natural progression in light of the continued effectiveness of the vaccines in preventing those vaccinated from severe illness, hospitalization, and death. So while it creates some anxiety to know that they're making a change, they are making this change based on good news or progress within the overall approach to the pandemic and the results of that approach. So what does that mean for us? As MDH shifts away from some of their case investigations and contact tracing, particularly making phone calls as part of case investigations for all new COVID-19 cases in Minnesota, we at the university are working on developing a system-wide exposure notification expectations resource so that people know what to do exactly for themselves, for their close coworkers or close contacts, with support for faculty, staff, and students who have tested positive or if they test positive for COVID. So the proportion of our community is highly vaccinated, and we have had very responsible behavior related to other public health measures, most notably masking, but others as well. So we have been at or in excess of our goal to be as safe as any place else. So we are as concerned as anyone else with shifting expectations as they have occurred, including this one from MDH, but not because we are concerned that it will create an increased risk of transmission or actually affect safety. This is an operational shift, and we will be communicating the details on it as we work together to develop this response. I want to be really clear that we don't have any data or any indication from any of the things we're measuring that we need to change our substantive approach to how we make the classroom or other campus environments safe. So I thank you very much, because that's possible because you have been vaccinated, because you are wearing masks, because you are reporting when you test positive if you receive those results off campus, and it's working. All of this, in a somewhat counterintuitive and ironic way, plugs into aspects of our new strategic plan, MPACT 2025, which was crafted before the pandemic, but which has been somewhat remarkably helpful as we've navigated through the pandemic. Many components have been able to proceed with really great and inspiring progress because of the partnership with all of you who have found somehow, I'm not quite sure how, the bandwidth to be our partners as we've worked on different initiatives and projects. So a few of these that I want to call to your attention. One is campus safety. MPACT 2025 addressed campus safety from its original drafting. That in most recently has affected the concurrent work under MSAFE, MSAFE being the project and initiative evolving from Dr. Cedric Alexander's review of UMPD, and closely examining those recommendations in order to ensure that our own policing in its actions, in its inventory, in its training reflects our values. Those are recommendations that will come to me and our chief and Vice President Myron Franz and the University Senate Campus Safety Committee. And they'll wrap up that work if everything stays on schedule at the end of this semester, but they've already begun. And then concurrently working with UMPD and other local law enforcement to address recent upticks in crime in surrounding campus neighborhoods. The ironic reality is the absence of bad news has been good news, and you may have noticed that the frequency of alerts and notifications has gone down. We say that with some caution because while the aspiration is for zero crime, that is an aspiration. So it is better. We reached a peak in concerning activity in May, and it has been coming down since then. And we are optimistic that our collective efforts will show that trend continuing. Another key commitment of the system-wide strategic plan is student success. There is an emphasis in this initiative around student mental health. So we launched the President's Initiative for Student Mental Health in February 2021 under the co-chairmanship of Professor Tabitha Greer-Reed from CEHD and Maggie Tao, who's the Senior Associate Vice President for Student Affairs. They had their kickoff retreat in August and are hard at work using a public health approach, data, practice, and research to look to ways to be a support and mitigating force in the really significant mental health challenges that our students here and across the country are experiencing. Another component of the strategic plan is around being good stewards of our fiscal resources. And to that end, as you know, we launched PEAK, which stands for Positioned for Excellence, Alignment, and Knowledge effort. This effort is led by Vice President Franz and Vice President for Human Resources, Ken Horstman, because the focus of this work is on administrative services, how we work as an organization in support of the mission of the university. Academic initiatives or core mission are not part of this effort. But Myron and Ken have been consulting actively with many of the Senate committees, and your feedback has been really instrumental in progress in this effort. They will be making a pretty substantive report to the Board of Regents at the October meeting next week as part of the Finance and Operations report. Finance and Operations at the board meeting will also cover the capital plan, budget model, dining, and the campus master plan. The next day at the full board meeting, we will cover PEAK again. There will be a discussion of the health sciences strategy, and Vice President Michael Goh will give an update on diversity, equity, and inclusion work if you're interested in following the board meeting. Another thing that's happening at the board meeting that we want to make sure you're aware of is the namings and renamings policy is coming back up for discussion. We've talked about this many times in this body, that we were doing a lot of work very much in partnership with you prior to May of 2020 and paused that work immediately after. That work is reinvigorated over the summer. The namings policy was due and scheduled for its comprehensive review in any case. So as it turns out, we'll be bringing that comprehensive review and the new language that we have prepared in consultation with all of you on renamings to the board. So we'll have a marked up copy of the policy for your review soon, actually, certainly before the end of this semester, so that there will be opportunity to provide feedback. And then the revised policy will go to the Board of Regents in December, and whether that will be for review or action will depend on how the consultation goes and what the nature of the feedback is in between. The renamings work is part of a bigger question on our public and institutional history. And one of the things that we started in that vein was a series called the Voices series, where we looked to the arts as part of our way to create platforms to express voice around what is happening in society as a whole. We've had about 20 Voices events. Many of you had events that you very graciously allowed to be co-signed or co-supported under this series. So we've really been able to do a lot of, I think, and experience a lot of really profound work. One of these events is coming up on October 18th at 5 p.m. This is actually a second event with National Book Award winner and poet Nikki Finney. She's doing a virtual workshop, Hotbeds, Insurgent Design for Collaborative Transformation. It's free, it's open to the public, but we are asking for registration so that we can keep count of who is there, with great thanks to National Book Award nominee Douglas Kearney, who's been facilitating this work along with several other people, including Bree Keeney in my office. So with that, Ned, I'll conclude my report and shift things to questions. One question was submitted that the provost will answer in her report, just calling attention to those of you who may have submitted questions in advance. So with that, Chris, if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Just giving a moment to see some hands go up. I see Mattia Ellert.
Yeah, hi, Mattia Aller. I am an officer of the Student Senate. So yes, I have 2 questions for you. So over this summer, I was tasked with helping to organize sort of some onboarding for student senators. And the university employee I was working with was fairly insistent that they wanted to separate the student senators by race to perform this onboarding. And I wrote a letter to you and the Board of Regents informing you of this and my discomfort with this. Additionally, having witnessed this previously at the university. And I have two questions for you about that. As the chair of the University Senate, do you publicly endorse segregating senators by race? And as the president of the university, why did it take two vice presidents whom the board office told me would reach out to discuss this matter? Why did it take them more than a month to contact me? And additionally, why did they try to pawn me off on their subordinate employees opposed to having a conversation directly with me? Thank you.
So I think it's very important for everyone hearing the question to both appreciate the question being raised and also to know that the process employed was intended to create an environment in which people could express their concerns around issues comfortably. It is a methodology that not everyone agrees with, but is recognized not as segregation, but as the creation of environments in which people can be comfortable raising voice, including in respectfully, Mattia raising voice right now. That is a very fundamentally different interpretation of the events of that day, and that was the nature of the response that was sent. I would respectfully disagree with the characterization of pawning off, but instead making sure that the person who was in touch was the person best able to answer the questions posed, which is often what we do. So that would be my response. Thank you.
Next on the list, I see Scott Petty.
Hi, President Gable. My name is Scott Petty. I'm a graduate senator from CFAS. So yesterday morning, the Wall Street Journal published an article highlighting the University of Minnesota for having earned exceptional returns of just under 50% on our endowment over the last fiscal year. As our endowment is really a collection of hundreds, if not thousands, of dedicated endowments for specific prescribed purposes. Can you speak to how these endowment accounts are distributed across the institution and how you expect the investment return that is probably about 5 times the expectations built into our budgeting may impact financial and operational decision-making across the university?
That's a great question. So thank you, Scott. So yes, we were very pleased to have a very good year on the return on the endowment. So it's important to remember that exactly as Scott describes, the endowment is not, it is reported as one rather substantial pot, but reflects philanthropy that is usually almost, not entirely, but almost exclusively directed or restricted in that the donations that lead to the resources available in the endowment come in as part of a gift structure where the donor is giving to a very specific thing. So very good investment returns yield better support for the thing that the donor originally supported in their gift or within the gift agreement. And so the returns would be distributed accordingly. It's very important to note that a lot of those returns and a lot of that philanthropy is associated with the support of student scholarships and the support for faculty research. There are other areas of support as well, obviously, but as a percentage, those two things will be the greatest beneficiaries of the returns that the endowment experienced last year. Who's next, Chris?
Next on the list, excuse me, I see Ioana Pribiage.
Yes, thank you so much. President Gable, I just wanted to ask a quick question about the COVID dashboard. I've been kind of wondering about the accuracy of the numbers that we're seeing, especially since similar dashboards at other universities, often smaller universities that have taken stricter measures. both with respect to vaccination and testing, are actually seeing higher numbers of COVID cases than we are. And so I'm wondering both about the accuracy. I know that the numbers only reflect tests taken on campus, but is there any way to kind of have a better, broader picture of that, and also to have a more constant stream of information rather than just a once a week update, so that those numbers can actually be used to make more informed decisions, both for individuals and for the administration itself?
Thank you for the question. So I have Dave, do you, Golden on the call. I'm going to defer to him to answer the question. But before, as he, unmutes or does whatever he needs to do, Dave being the director at Boynton, there are a couple of things to keep in mind sort of baked within your question, which is the data we have access to is what we're reporting, because a lot of people don't test on campus. We don't necessarily know the results of their tests. So there is some limitation operationally to what you're describing. That doesn't mean that we're not tracking the results from off campus. That's a big part of our partnership with MDH. It informs our decision making, even if we're not able to report it as dashboard data because we don't control its accuracy. But with that, I'll defer to Dave.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. And, just so you know, too, with that testing site with MTest, we're back up to a lot of tests per day, and we're doing probably over 1,000 this week. And the people that are using MTest, you have to remember 75% of them are either symptomatic or a known exposure. So 3/4 of them, are suspicious for COVID, and we're still holding at below 3%. If we were doing just mandatory testing across the board, that overall, you would expect that to be lower in general. And so we're not seeing that. This is a very low rate from people that are highly suspicious. So this is a pretty good number. We also get a line list every day from MDH, and MDH is reporting to us every student that that reports a test somewhere else in other locations. And that's, we don't get like the self-tests or some of the pharmacies or some of those places, but they do get quite a few of those positives do get reported through to MDH. And so we are able to see those as well, where we're not seeing, this big steep climb in results. And so we've got some good information that tells us we're really doing pretty well. We're also not seeing those clusters, those groups of outbreaks, as you mentioned earlier too. So it seems to be working pretty well. And then the weekly, it's sort of like a week trend is a really nice window to take a look and see how your trend's doing, as opposed to a day-to-day as well, because of the way test comes in and get reported too. There's sometimes some lags there too. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dave. All right, I see there are 2 more hands. We'll cut it off after that. Can we call on the next person, please, Chris?
Sure. The next person is Claire Halpert.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. I have another question about the COVID situation. And I was really glad to hear that Boynton is expanding capacity, because I was hearing from students, especially at the very beginning of the semester, about delays in getting tests. And I wondered if there are plans to add rapid testing options. My understanding is that Boynton is currently saying allow for 3 to 5 days after you get your test to receive a result, though sometimes it can be faster. And I think there are some serious educational implications for the lack of rapid tests on campus. People are supposed to be isolating when they wait for their test results. And that's something that students have expressed some stress about, that they want to do the responsible thing and get the test, but they don't feel like they can afford that window unless they really have to.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it is it's a balance being struck between the more accurate PRC test and the rapid test, in terms of making sure that we know exactly what's going on in any given case. But Dave, I'll let you give the details on where things are with the capacity in both categories.
Yeah, so we're still working on increasing capacity at MTest site. We always have next day availability, and we want to get to the point where same day. Also, using the Mayo Lab, we were concerned about a delay in test results. We were within 24 hours, especially over the summer when we were able to do everything in-house. But reagents are short right now, so we're back to Mayo, but they've been turning all of our tests around in 24 hours, which has been great. And so next day availability and 24-hour turnaround, we're probably comfortable enough. We can up our message a little bit to say, 1 to 3 or something like that. We always give some room because sometimes there's lags, but in general, we're turning them around pretty quickly right now.
Thank you. Mary, you're our last question.
Hi, President Gable. So can you take just a minute and highlight how the new and obviously effective anti-crime efforts are affecting or impacting the former discussion that we had about the demilitarization of the university police?
Okay, so yes, thank you for the question. So we've been sending out reports. In fact, there's one in your inbox that will hit most of your inboxes while we're meeting, with updates on all of the different intersectional initiatives we've been doing to reduce crime. So we have our own UMPD officers who, of course, are active participants in and already fulfilling some of the recommendations of MSAFE and from Dr. Alexander, who we know are aligned with our values, taking overtime shifts to increase patrols, along with other increased visibility in patrols with local law enforcement, increased lighting, just regular lighting, increased blue lighting, meaning those highlighting a phone that you can call. And some people say, why would you do that? Everybody has a cell phone. But sometimes the crime is that someone takes your cell phone or knocks it out of your hand and breaks it. We now have community ambassadors. In fact, the liaison is the person who authored your latest update so that the community can meet this person and see the effort happening there. And then there's also a natural kind of arc to crime. It's often higher in the summer when the population in the surrounding neighborhoods is lower, and it goes down in the fall and it goes way down in the winter. And we would be delighted if that was the trend again this year. That would happen regardless of these additional efforts. We believe our efforts are helping and accelerating that positive trend that we would normally see, improving it. With regard to demilitarization, the inventory is underway. Part of what MSAFE will do and work then with the University Senate Committee is on the definitions around demilitarization, about which there is some disagreement. And so there's some work to do at the margins there, but in the meantime, the inventory is occurring, and that's done in partnership with audit. That's, sort of an arm's length effort. So that's where that is right now.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. At this time, I'll go to item 9, which is the provost report, and I will call on Provost Croson.
Thank you, President.
Oh, and actually, Rachel, if I may, before we move on to her report, I want to loop back on the answer to Claire's question. I believe was Claire's question, and remind everyone, and we will refresh this in our communications as we work on that MDH transition that I referred to earlier, that if you are vaccinated, you don't have to isolate while you are awaiting your test result. That is an important point in terms of a variety of things, but we will be sure to communicate that clearly in future messaging, since sometimes that very important fact gets lost. So with apologies, Provost Croson.
Great. Thank you, President Gable. And thank you all for your start to the fall semester. I know there's a lot of stress and anxiety, but I also see the joy of our students and our colleagues being together. Personally, I've had the opportunity to meet some of you and some of my staff in person for the first time this month, because I started just as the pandemic started, and that's been really, really wonderful. As the president mentioned, high rates of vaccination and continued indoor masking has been effective in preventing outbreaks on campus. All of the Twin Cities classrooms now have HVAC systems that comply with CDC guidance. Some have been augmented in order to achieve that. N95 masks and other PPE are easily available. And as you heard from David Golden, testing is offered either through the university or via pharmacies and remains free to faculty, staff, and students. We're also all optimistic about the news of imminent emergency use authorization of vaccines for children ages 5 through 11. And at least what I read on the news is that approval for ages 0 through 5 is likely by the end of the year, so by December. I'm delighted to share the news of the arrival of some new leadership in January at the university. So Alejandra Peña Gutierrez will be starting as director of the Weizmann Art Museum in January. Dr. Nisha Botchway will be starting as the dean of the Humphrey School, and Dr. Andrew Aline will be starting as the dean of the College of Science and Engineering. This is all contingent on approval for the Board of Regents at the end of next week. The upcoming fall will be busy. So Dr. Will Durfee has agreed to chair a committee on liberal education curriculum reform. Dr. Phil Bowman has agreed to chair a task force on faculty behavior in graduate education. And that's going to be coordinated with some broader initiatives around faculty behavior. He's going to serve on multiple groups. So thank you, Phil, for doing that. I'll also be engaging with a number of Senate committees to review policies, either that are due for review or where, based on our experience from this last year, we believe some adjustment is needed. So in addition to those scheduled for comprehensive review, there are two on my list that emerged. One is policies regarding emeritus faculty, and one are policies regarding departments or other academic units issuing statements. We've also convened a task force to discuss the academic calendar and to explore changes we should consider that will increase the sense of community and belonging of our students, faculty, and staff. So that will be coming through STEP and onto this body as well. I want to thank you again for your collaboration, especially to Ned and Colleen, who have been just phenomenal partners. They're wonderful at bringing your voices and concerns to our discussions and to providing important input as we navigate through this next academic year. So the Senate office received a few questions which are more relevant for our discussion at 4 p.m. today in Faculty Senate. So I'm going to plan to answer them then. But with that, I'll conclude my remarks and we can take some questions from the floor.
Thank you, Provost Croson. Chris, if you could identify and I'll call on you for your questions. Any questions for the Provost?
I see Mattia Eller.
Mattia?
Yeah, hi. Once again, Mattia Aller, a student officer of the Student Senate. So this question is for Provost Croson. So I sort of starts like a random question of personal interest to me, especially earlier this month, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, and earlier this week, I read an article in Inside Higher Ed about African American men's enrollment in college. And I was wondering how it applied to the University of Minnesota. So do you have a sense of what percentage of Black domestic male undergrads on the Twin Cities campus, what percent of them are involved in university athletics? And then I have a follow-up question of to what degree do we have African-American men earning degrees from the Twin Cities campus who have not been admitted to support the athletics department?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I will reach out to our enrollment folks and I can get that to you.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would also just like to point out that that the outdoor men's track team was saved from shutdown last fall by fears of the measurable impact on student diversity as well. So I think that plays into it. Thank you.
Other questions for the Provost?
I see the hand of Scott Petty.
Scott?
Hi, Provost Croson. Scott Petty, Graduate Senator from CFANS. So this morning during our meeting for the Student Senate, the report from the Council of Graduate Students mentioned that the task force that you're organizing for around graduate advising now has 2 student seats. And as one of the students who signed one of the hundreds of students who signed the petition last spring, asking you to create this, When we were having those discussions, there were 3 student seats. And so I was wondering if you could explain, when was student representation reduced from 3 seats to 2 seats? What was the logic behind this decision? And who was involved? I mean, what were there objections from particular parts of the university to having a student voice in what's really, what's a conversation that's clearly very important to graduate students?
So thanks for the question. My understanding is that there are 4 graduate student seats on that committee. But let me go back and double check with Scott, and I'll get back to you if that's not the case.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, any last questions? All right, thank you, Provost Croson. Item 11 is the SCC report. Ned, I'll call on you, Professor Patterson, to please give this report.
Thank you, President Gable. So the Senate Consultative Committee report, we, as we've heard from the questions here all summer and in the fall, have had a lot of COVID issues coming forth to us in the way that I had presented in the orientation. Concerns, we've had a lot of consultations. We've echoed the concerns to the administration. When they're significant, amplified them, and when there's consensus, advocated, such as when there wasn't a masking requirement and there was many in the community wanted it, we were starting to advocate for that. And I think a number of factors brought about that being implemented, including our advocacy, but not solely our advocacy. But in some of these issues, as you're hearing some of the questions, there's a wide variety of opinions, from some still very concerned about what's been done and feeling that enough has not been done, which I'll get back to in a minute, to others who do think the decisions are good and they're fine with where we're at and everywhere in between. So we've had discussions of these at Senate Consultative Committee meetings, special ones this summer. The chair and the vice chair of the Senate Consultative Committee, myself and Colleen, are members of the President's Emergency Management Planning Committee about COVID emergency or any others, but mainly COVID, that's currently meeting every other week. So as you want to bring forth concerns here, we can early on get them in those meetings with senior administrators. And so just so you know, that's another avenue. We did have this summer a special Senate Consultative Committee meeting about a resolution about COVID influenza vaccine mandate from senators before there'd been the changes in university policies. That was possibly going to be on the agenda of this meeting, but then once the administration came out with the COVID vaccine requirement for students and attestation for as to vaccine or testing from employees, the authors dropped the resolution and felt that that was sufficient, is what they indicated to us. For that, when that first came out, again, there was very early consultation from the leaders to Colleen and I as the Senate Consultative Committee chairs and the SCC about all this. And we've had quite a bit of input into all those policies and continue to do that. And part of that, then part of the SCC is there's 8 consultative committee leaders of our 4 senates. 7 of those 8 are members of the Senate Consultative Committee. And when that first came out about the attestation for employees or testing or vaccine requirement for students, we had meetings about that. We unanimously agreed and supported the general concept of testing or vaccination for all, and sent a letter to the Board of Regents to help with their vote on the student testing. That, although again, there was a wide variety even within that group and the farther representatives of our consultative committees as to the exact details, and there still continues to be a wide variety of opinions as to the exact details still. And then just this morning related to COVID, there was a special Senate Consultative Committee combined with Faculty Consultative Committee with a group from a group of faculty senators who proposed a special Senate Faculty Senate meeting for a resolution pertaining to COVID-19 safety measures. And then that was discussed in detail, voted, which should be the appropriate Senate, and the SCC as the governing body of the University Senate, and the FCC as the governing body, the executive committee and steering committee of the Faculty Senate, decided to call next Wednesday morning, most likely, first a special Faculty Senate meeting about this resolution for discussion, followed by a special University Senate meeting. So we can continue all these questions about COVID. We'll continue in those special Senate meetings called next week. That special request came from 18 faculty senators. So that's why we're starting off with the Faculty Senate meeting first. And so shortly you will be getting the agenda of that special meeting and the resolution, which includes 7 major points currently. Then onto other non-COVID things, PEAK, the Position for Excellence, Alignment, and Knowledge, the initiative from the university for system-wide efforts to across non-academic functions to increase efficiency, gain capacity, and steer our teaching, research, and outreach mission in the future, has been having a lot of consultation with Senate leadership in various forums, the FCC, the Consultative Committee leaders. And so we've had feedback from the faculty perspective. Faculty weren't too involved initially, but faculty right now are doing a lot of administrative things. So there's been increased faculty consultation, and from the beginning, a lot of consultation with staff about all of that. And then lastly, a couple more things. There was a ongoing effort for the last 2 years about contract faculty, and we're calling fixed term faculty, which they typically have a fixed term, and P&A professionals that do teaching and research mission strongly. And we have recommendations to the Faculty Consultative Committee, various committees about how to go forth with that. And we're recommending a Senate staff be devoted to a potential subcommittee or committee related to contract faculty and P&A, and that there be somebody from the provost's office devoted to that topic. So lastly, we just had a Senate chairs meeting of all the Senate chairs organized by the Senate SEC leadership, where we went through the priorities of each of all those committees you saw in my orientation for upcoming. Typically that's been a public document, but not necessarily shared for everybody to see. So part of our messaging to the whole University Senate, we will send out that document, link to it so that all senators can see what all those committees we listed on the orientation have for their priorities now. And then that document is a living document. It will keep updating as those priorities change so that you know what's going on. And I think that ends what I wanted to report on today. Thank you. Back to President Gabel.
Thanks, Ned. Item 12 is a motion from the Senate Committee on Committees to suspend the rules in order to appoint a chair of the Campus Committee on Student Behavior. A 2/3 majority is required to approve the motion. So just as a matter of background, there are comments that there was difficulty in securing a chair for the Campus Committee on Student Behavior for the 2021-2022 academic year. So the Committee on Committees would like to allow someone who would require this rule change in order to serve in the role for another year, despite having exceeded the normal maximum. So with that, do we need a second for this motion? Forgive me for just throwing that out there. No, because it comes out of committee. So host, if you could initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 149 ayes, 5 nays, and 20 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 13 is a discussion of a proposed new administrative policy on discrimination. For this item, I'd like to call on Tina Marasam to present. Tina?
Thank you, President Gabel. I'll just start by saying that I am very excited to talk to you all today about this draft proposed new administrative policy on discrimination. I think it is really a needed addition to our community, so I'm excited to share it with you. So we can move to the first slide, and this slide provides some context for the development of the policy. So as background, my office, Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, or EOAA, receives and responds to complaints of discrimination. And one of the ways that we respond is by investigating complaints to determine whether discrimination occurred in violation of university policy. And the policy that we look to right now in our discrimination investigations is the Board of Regents policy that's entitled Equity, Diversity, Equal Opportunity, and Affirmative Action. This board policy states that the university will provide equal access to and opportunity in its programs, facilities, and employment without regard to race, disability, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and the other protected characteristics that are listed on the slide. So the board policy states a commitment to provide equal opportunity and access across identities. And in doing so, the board policy implicitly prohibits discrimination. However, the board policy's language is fairly general, as board policies generally are, and it doesn't explicitly state that the university prohibits discrimination. It doesn't contain a definition of discrimination, and we don't have a policy level procedures by which the university has committed to respond to discrimination. So our assessment is that we need a policy and procedure that more directly addresses discrimination, and that's what we've drafted and shared with you for your consultation today. We can move to the next slide. So our goals in drafting the policy are, first, to define exactly what conduct is prohibited as discrimination. We need to provide notice to our community about what behavior is prohibited. Second, we want to provide clear and fair procedures for responding to concerns. We want our procedures to be transparent. And we also think it's fair to have procedures published in a policy that holds the university and also EOAA as the investigative office accountable for responding appropriately. And third, we think it's helpful to provide a central repository of best practices for how to provide accommodations for disability, for pregnancy and lactation, as well as for religious practices. These are really complicated areas that give rise to lots of concerns and questions, and it's just so important that individuals who need accommodations can access them so that they have an equitable opportunity to succeed. So for that reason, we've created a number of frequently asked questions documents that are attached to the policy that talk about how to request and provide these accommodations. So those are the reasons for why we need a discrimination policy, and I'll turn next just to give a brief summary of the content of the proposed policy. And I'll just say, for the most part, the policy codifies EOAA's current procedures and the definitions that EOAA already uses when responding to discrimination concerns. So except for a few changes that I'll highlight for you, the draft policy describes how the university is already responding to discrimination concerns. So a key component of the policy is the definition of prohibited discrimination. And under the policy, discrimination occurs in three ways. First, when a university member experiences an intangible negative employment or academic action because of their race, their gender, religion, or other protected characteristic. For example, an employee is not promoted or is fired in part or in full because of a protected characteristic. A student is given an unfairly low grade because of a protected characteristic. A second, discrimination occurs when a university member is denied a reasonable accommodation that's required because of their disability, religious practices, or pregnancy, or childbirth or lactation. And then the third and final category of discrimination is discriminatory harassment. And there is a longer definition for discriminatory harassment in the policy, which was too long to fit on my slide. But in sum, discriminatory harassment is a large category of discrimination. It can include many kinds of unwelcome conduct on the basis of a protected characteristic. For example, it can include epithets or comments or jokes that target an individual or group based on a protected characteristic. Discriminatory harassment can include conduct that communicates that people with a certain protected characteristic don't belong in a particular professional or academic field. And it can also include treating an individual or group differently because they either conform or don't conform to a stereotype that's based on a protected characteristic they hold. We can move to the next slide, please. So those are the definitions, and I'll just next turn to saying a few words about the procedures. In cases involving student respondents, so these are cases where a student is reported to have engaged in discrimination. The procedures for responding to discrimination complaints don't change at all from the current procedures. Where students are reported to have engaged in discrimination, the reports are now and also will continue to be addressed according to the Student Conduct Code procedures. In cases involving employee respondents, the draft policy generally codifies the university's current approach to responding to discrimination concerns. However, there are a few key changes to our investigation process in cases with employee respondents. And I'll discuss that investigation process on the next slide. But before I move on to the investigation process, I just want to mention that EOAA also uses an informal problem-solving process rather than an investigation process to respond to the majority of bias and discrimination reports we receive. And in those informal processes, we use a number of different strategies to try to solve the problem and to prevent further concerns of discrimination. And that those informal problem-solving processes remain an option under the new policy. And I just wanted to highlight those informal processes, even though we're not making any changes to them in the new policy, as I do realize that not all people who share concerns with our office want to participate in an investigation. Next slide, please. So back to the changes to the investigation process in employee cases. I thought it might be helpful to just give a brief overview of our investigation process so you can better understand the ways that the new policy will change that process. So the three key changes are in bold type on the slide, and I'll make note when we get to them. But the first step in our formal process is an investigation by EOAA. Then EOAA produces a written investigation report that includes a decision on responsibility. And that's a determination of whether the respondent engaged in discrimination in violation of our policy. So if the respondent is found responsible for engaging in discrimination, EOAA makes recommendations for responsive action, which can include discipline and also other types of responsive action, restorative or rehabilitative or monitoring. And we make that recommendation to the responsible university authority. And now we're at number 2 now, and you can see there that the term university authority is bolded. And that's because this is new. Under the new policy, it would be the dean, vice president, or vice chancellor who would serve as the university authority and who would make decisions on discipline and discrimination cases. Currently, a lower level supervisor may make these decisions. So this change is being proposed to promote more consistent discipline across respondents, and also to ensure that these decisions are made by a more senior university leader to enhance accountability. Also, these same university authorities are named in sexual misconduct cases, so this change will align the decision maker on discipline across discrimination and sexual misconduct cases. So next we're at number 3 now, and this is another new piece, and it is, if the university authority, so that's the dean or vice president or vice chancellor, makes a decision on discipline that differs meaningfully from the discipline recommended by EOAA, that decision would go to one more round of approval, and it would need to be approved by either the chancellor or provost in cases with faculty respondents, or the vice president for human resources or chancellor in cases with staff and third-party respondents. So this new provision also mirrors the sanctioning process in the sexual misconduct policy. And really the purpose here is to have an additional high-level check to ensure that appropriate discipline is being imposed. Then, and now we're at number 4, after any decision on discipline is made, both parties will have the opportunity to appeal that decision on discipline or on responsibility. And this appeal process is also new. Currently, EOAA makes that decision on responsibility, and that is a final decision. Now, under the new policy, either party would be able to challenge EOAA's decision. And in my mind, this is really an important check that we need just in order to make sure that we're getting to the best conclusions in all of these cases. And then finally, as is the current practice, the respondent, the person who was accused of discrimination, and if they're found responsible and discipline is imposed, they can challenge discipline under the procedures that are accorded to their employee classification. So faculty can challenge discipline through the tenure code process, labor represented folks can challenge discipline through their bargaining unit grievance process, and P&A and civil service employees can challenge discipline through the Office for Conflict Resolution hearing process. So those are the key changes that the administrative policy makes to our investigation process. And then lastly, I just want to briefly share one more change made by the policy that's related to reporting. Next slide, please. So the policy also newly adds a requirement that supervisors and HR professionals report concerns of discrimination that they receive to the Campus Equal Opportunity Office. And the reasons for proposing this new requirement are, one, to collect these concerns centrally so that we can better monitor patterns of behavior by individuals and also in particular units. Currently, I don't think that we have a reliable understanding of how many discrimination concerns are raised across the university and in what units, given that we don't have any kind of centralized reporting. The second reason for this proposed requirement is to promote consistency in our responses to discrimination concerns across the university, and also to make sure that all of our responses are appropriate and sufficiently robust and thorough. And then finally, I think that this new reporting requirement for supervisors and HR professionals will be helpful so that the Campus Equal Opportunity Office can offer guidance and support to supervisors who are responding to these types of concerns on the ground, really at the time when they need it. Because in many cases, these concerns are often both sensitive and complex. So those are the key parts of the policy that I wanted to cover with you. And I think we have some time now for discussion, and I really welcome all of your thoughts and questions and comments.
Thank you, Tina. Go ahead, I'll let everybody queue up. Scott?
I'm guessing Sarani is in line for the same reason I am. I'll let her go first.
Thank you. Sarani?
Thank you. I just want to quickly note that this morning the Student Senate passed a resolution asking that caste, which is, not everybody knows what that is. So in India, there is a socioeconomic system which promotes its stratification among people on the basis of who they are born to, and it is the caste system, and it has led to a great deal of oppression on the Indian subcontinent and apparently now in the United States, and in the United States where we have brought it. And so this morning, this Student Senate passed a resolution asking that caste be added to one of the 16 protected classes that the university currently protects against, because as you noted, Tina, the Regents policy is very broad. It shouldn't be very complicated, we thought. And this seemed like a good point to note it. I want to also note that I did engage in advocacy and with contact with some affected parties over the past week. And we also look forward to continuing to engage with your office and with them in order to see if we can include this protection for this affected community. And it's relevant to the non-discrimination policy, so.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarani, for bringing this up. And I'm excited to hear that this discussion was going on at the Student Senate committee. My understanding is that caste is the type of characteristic that that is similar to the other types of characteristics that we protect against discrimination, right? It's inherited, it's unalterable over the course of one's life. It can determine access to opportunities and resources. I'm also aware that there's been increasing national attention to this problem of discrimination and bias against individuals. Because of caste. I know that there's a recent survey in the last few years that also showed that there was caste-based discrimination, bias, and also even violence that was occurring in US institutions of higher education. And that Brandeis has recently become the first university to add caste to their list of protected characteristics. So I think this is a very interesting issue and concern. Currently, as you noted, all the protected characteristics that we prohibit discrimination based on are listed in the Board of Regents policy. Right now, each one of those characteristics comes either from state or federal anti-discrimination law. So something like caste would be, you know, an additional protected characteristic that we decided to add as an institution. And, you know, that would go through the process of consultation for a Board of Regents policy. So I think that, you know, this administration policy needs to follow the board policy. So it's not ripe right at this moment for us to add caste into the administration policy, but I'm very interested in this issue. And I would love to hear more, especially about, you know, if concerns that this kind of caste-based bias or discrimination has happened at our institution, because I think that would really help flesh out the picture for us. So let's find a time to talk. But also I will just say that if EOAA received a concern of caste-based discrimination now, even, you know, when it's not directly listed in the Board of Regents policy, we would certainly look at the other protected characteristics like race, religion, national origin, color. I know that caste has many components, but that there may be some protection already in our discrimination policy under those characteristics.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Ned?
Thank you. I have two questions / clarifications. The first is, you mentioned for the informal process, that's, if I just want to clarify this, that's when the complainant doesn't want to have an investigation, and so they've chosen that. And then along with that, if a complainant chooses to have an investigation, does that mean an investigation always happens, or there's criteria that are met? That's my first two questions, and I have one more follow-up.
Okay, good questions. I love talking about the informal process. So the informal process is really a collection of strategies where we try to solve the problem, right? And it can involve some components of an investigation, looking in to see what happened, and that can sometimes help us decide what kind of process is needed to address the concerns. The times when we use informal problem-solving processes there's several. One is when the conduct that's reported doesn't rise to the level of a policy violation. Right? So there are harms that happen, there are insensitive comments that are made that we want to address at the institution, but they may not rise to the level of a policy violation. So we really encourage folks to come to our office if they have concerns of you know, bias or hurtful identity-based comments, because we do have informal ways to address them, even if kind of they're less serious in nature. Another reason that we don't go forward with an investigation is, you know, complainants often don't want to, right? There is some time and effort involved, and, you know, folks also, for a lot of reasons, maybe don't want to be identified as someone who's brought a concern. And through our informal process, we're often able to kind of keep the anonymity or confidentiality of the reporter, but still to find ways to address the concerns. We also use informal problem solving in cases where there's an intersection of academic freedom or free speech concerns, right? There may be some reported comments that were made squarely in the classroom context, talking about the coursework at issue, and yet were still harmful to, say, a student. So that, you know, that kind of speech may be protected by our academic freedom policy or by the First Amendment of the Constitution. So an investigation and discipline might not be appropriate, but there are still other ways to address the concern and to try to mitigate harm and prevent it from happening again. So those are some of the reasons we use the informal process. You know, if someone wants an investigation, we will first absolutely take their interest in an investigation. That's one of the main things that we look at. Do they want to participate in an investigation? There are some cases where we will say it doesn't appear that an investigation is appropriate. Generally, those are cases where when they tell us what happened, we think even if all of that happened and we found that it happened, it wouldn't rise to the level of a policy violation. In that kind of case, we would say generally, let's think of other ways that may be able to address it more effectively.
Thanks. And President Gabel, do you think I have time for one more quick question, or I can do it offline if not?
There's only one question after you, so I think we're fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I just was thinking, as we're going to be talking about this indirectly a different way, just the workload of the Senate Judicial Committee. And if I'm understanding correctly, this will be a new thing where an appeal for the discrimination results could result in an appeal. Is that is new? I just want to clarify. And then are your thoughts of, do you have any idea of how many cases might be appealed, or that's just unpredictable?
So the way it's written right now in the policy is that the appellate officers in discrimination cases would be the same ones that serve in sexual misconduct cases. And those are generally on the Twin Cities campus, it is the provost or her designee for faculty cases, or the vice president or his designee for staff cases. It's the chancellor or his designee on the other campuses. So I don't think the appeal would go to the Senate Judicial Committee. What they would hear, my understanding is if discipline was imposed and on a faculty member because of a discrimination concern, and they wanted to challenge that discipline.
Thank you. David, you can identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm a CFAN's senator. So I had a concern, specifically, to what extent are any of these revisions linked to the changes that the university had to make last year in the sexual discrimination policies that were promulgated under Secretary DeVos, which I thought raised the burden on the complainant. And I'd be concerned if there's any issue of any of these policies raising the burden on the complainant at all.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I will tell you that when we were making those changes that we were required to make last summer as a result of the Title IX regulations, we asked the question, should we make this a sexual misconduct and discrimination policy, right? So that we have one procedure for all, given that they're all discrimination and civil rights concerns. And just for the reasons you raised, David, we decided not to do that because we did feel that there's some elements of the Title IX regulations which we need to implement that we felt were not necessarily best practices for our community, that we thought might inhibit reporting and raise the burden, frankly, on all parties in ways that were not necessary for a fair resolution. So there are many parts of the discrimination policy that do mirror the sexual misconduct policy, right? Because they are all discrimination concerns. However, we did not include in the discrimination policy those pieces of our sexual misconduct policy that are required by the regulations and that we feel are burdensome and not useful. So, for example, there's a lot of technical pieces in the sexual misconduct policy about filing a formal complaint, and only certain people can file it, and it needs to be filed in a certain way, which we have found can be a barrier for complainants in reporting. The sexual misconduct policy also has in many cases, a mandatory live hearing process before a hearing panel, which we have found actually inhibits complainants from bringing complaints and also inhibits respondents from wanting to go through the process. And they're likely to want to resolve informally because it is, no matter how humane we try to make it, which we have worked really hard at, it's a stressful process. So we did not include that hearing process in this policy. Instead, we thought it was sufficient to have a really thorough investigation with lots of due process protections and then an appeal to check.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Okay, last question. Kathleen, if you could identify yourself.
Hello, thank you. I'm a vet med senator. And my question is, how will the new reporting requirement be carried out? Thank you.
Yeah, so good question. So what we have proposed is that, HR professionals and supervisors, if they learn about a discrimination concern in the context of those roles. So if you're a supervisor and your supervisee tells you that they're experiencing discrimination, that you would need to report that to the Campus Equal Opportunity Office. Right. So it wouldn't apply if say you're a faculty member who both supervises and teaches classes. It wouldn't apply in the context where you were teaching. Right? Like if a student told you this, it would only be in the context of a supervisee telling you as a supervisor that I've experienced discrimination, right? In general, in those types of cases, supervisees would be expecting some kind of responsive action from the university. So if a supervisor learns about a discrimination concern in that context, or HR in their HR professional context, they would need to reach out to our office. By email or by phone, or we have a reporting form on our website. And, generally, I think what would happen is a supervisor would reach out to their HR representative and their HR representative would refer them to us or just give us a call themselves.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this administrative policy on discrimination will come up for vote at the November 4th meeting of the Senate. But in the meantime, the consultation is open and will continue in the period in between. So thank you very much, Tina. Very much appreciate it. Okay, item 14 is old business. There's no old business for the University Senate today. Item 15 concerns new business for the University Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Okay, seeing none, I will call for a motion to adjourn the University Senate meeting. Is there a motion?
Maverick Island CCAPS, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
We have about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 163 ayes, 0 nays, and 3 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Okay, so we are adjourned. I would like to announce that we'll take a 5-minute break, and then the Faculty Senate will convene at, let's see, 4:05. Look at that timing. So I'll also note for your attention that Professor Chomsky will chair the Faculty Senate meeting. So we'll go on our break. Thank you very much.
Can I ask someone a question, kind of a point of information?
We're adjourned, so you can just ask, Scott.
So there's a whole series of education policies that are going to come up in the Faculty Senate, and obviously as a student, I won't be there. Where can I find a text of the proposed policy changes for adoption?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll get someone to email you.
I will
Okay,
send
thanks.
that out. This is Amber. I'll send that out.
Okay, thank you.
I see it is 4:05 now, and so I would like to call the Faculty Senate to order. This is a meeting of the Faculty Senate. While non-faculty senators are welcome to attend the meeting, only faculty senators may introduce business and vote on matters considered at this meeting. The floor is reserved for faculty senators. Others may have the floor only if yielded time by a faculty senator and recognized by the chair. Item 2 on the agenda is a motion to approve a special rule limiting each speaker to 2 minutes each time they're recognized. A 2/3 majority of those present and voting is required to approve the special rule. Again, only faculty senators should vote. Is there any discussion of the item? Host, will you please initiate the poll?
Point of information, or can we make this rule permanent so we don't have to vote on it every single meeting?
I think it's a good question. That's one of the things that is being talked about in the process of reviewing all of the rules. And I think you will see it when we change the bylaws, but because it's in the bylaws, we actually have to vote on it each time until we make that change. So I think it's coming, but thanks for the question. It's not so special anymore.
You have a couple more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 97 ayes and 1 nay, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 3 concerns administrative responses to Faculty Senate action and would be presented for information. There are no responses pending at this time. Item 4 is approval of the minutes from the special Faculty Senate meeting on September 23rd, 2021. Host, can you please initiate the poll?
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 75 ayes, 0 nays, and 23 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 5 is the Faculty Consultative Committee report. Professor Patterson, I call on you to give the report.
Thank you. It will be probably fairly brief because a fair amount of things overlap with the SEC report, and I assume the vast majority were there. So all the COVID stuff all relates. I'll add that specifically about COVID concerns, the Faculty Consultative Committee has had a number of meetings over the past 3 months, quite a number of meetings regarding COVID plans and decisions with President Gabel, Provost Croson, other senior administrators. So I do encourage you to continue to bring your concerns forward so we can get them to administration proactively and early. I did mention in the SEC report, the PEAK, the Position for Excellence, Alignment, and Knowledge, that was mainly for non-academic areas. But again, I'll just repeat once more that since faculty said there's a lot of things where I'm doing their academic, or I have to approve expense reports, or when I'm putting in a grant, et cetera. So some of that feedback has been going back, and based on that, we've had increased faculty input into that, and that includes the FCC meeting regularly with the PEAK team. In August, the FCC had our retreat, and so our 3 big things to work on this year, which is on that Senate committee chairs spreadsheet that we'll have shared more broadly. It's always been publicly available, but probably not very accessible. One is communication. We've been hearing that some senators don't feel like there's been a lot of communication to the administration about concerns. In my experience, there really has been, but we want to make it even more clear how you can bring your concerns forth. So part of that was the Senate orientation. You can go to consultative committee chairs for your Senate with concerns that affect more than one college or unit. You can go to committee chairs of a specific Senate committee or faculty Senate committee in this case. With that, if you're unsure, you can go to the Senate staff at senate@umn.edu email. to bring those forth. In addition for that, you've probably seen we have started having a biweekly, every 2-week definition of a brief report of 3 things we're working on. We've worked on that recently and 2 that are coming up so that you're aware of them. Many of these things I'm talking about today will be on that report, so you'll see it in written form. And then in there, we had ways to email us with concerns or request that you attend part of a faculty consultative committee meeting to talk about an issue that you want to talk about. So there are ways in that communication to bring forward. And again, we are encouraging you, as I indicated in the Senate, the University Senate meeting, to when we have meetings and issues to go to your constituents to be sure you're representing all faculty in that and not just only we all are representing our own personal views. The provost talked about the faculty misconduct panel and about graduate students. We've had SCC input into that and had nominations from the FCC for faculty members to be on that. And then additionally also for the president's system-wide committee or panel task force, I'm sorry, on faculty misconduct, and there will be continuing consultation there. At our retreat, we also did have an extensive discussion. This is still a work in progress, so I'd love to hear any of your ideas of how can the faculty governance, the faculty lead in DEI and anti-racism efforts. We shouldn't have to do everything the university's doing or everything, but what are maybe 3 to 5 key areas we can really be leaders and help lead the university forward, whether they fit with the MPACT 2020 strategic plan, or we think they're separate things that should be done. So there's some things we're thinking about in the faculty consultative committee, and we would love any of your feedback of how you think we should do. And then lastly, of course, we've had a lot of consultation on our item coming up shortly on the COVID-19 vaccine attestation discipline advisory panel. We've been talking with Provost Croson and Vice Provost Ropers within the faculty consultative committee to other committee chairs extensively, and we'll hear more about that shortly. So that ends my faculty consultative committee report. Thank you, and back to you, Chair Chomsky.
Thank you. And you're right, we're moving on to that very item. Item 6 is action on the faculty attestation discipline panel proposal, as was discussed at the special faculty senate meeting on September 23rd. Just a note as we begin, because this is an unusual item in some respects. This is a proposal of the provost made pursuant to section 14.1 of the faculty tenure code to create a special panel to review cases of faculty misconduct related to the COVID-19 vaccination and testing attestation requirement. Since this is a proposal by the provost, it is not subject to amendment by this body, although the faculty senate must approve the proposal for it to be effective. And the provost is here, will be speaking about this, and will take into consideration any comments that are made during the discussion of the proposal. And with that, I come back to you, Ned, to introduce the item.
So I think, yeah, we introduced it at the special meeting last week. I think this time we're going to have Provost Croson set up but a little, go into detail with Vice Provost Ropers, and then I'll have a few remaining comments, and then we'll open it up for continued discussion, any questions, and then a vote at the end. So Provost Croson, off to you.
Great, thank you, Professor Patterson. So as you know, our employee attestation around vaccination status applies to all employees, including those covered by the tenure code. When we implemented the attestation requirement, we knew that we would need an enforcement mechanism, some consequences for not attesting, or if it was discovered that someone had falsified or violated its terms. We quickly realized that the processes would need to be different for staff, for unionized faculty, and for faculty covered under the tenure code. So this discussion only applies to that latter group. I'm going to turn the floor over in a moment to Vice Provost Ropers to present our proposal, including one change we made in response to the discussion in this group on September 23rd. We also received 3 questions in advance, which I will address after her presentation, maybe after Ned's comments, and then we'll open it up for the discussion from the floor. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Provost Ropers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Provost Croson. And I am going to try to get my slides up. Just one moment. There we go. Are these visible to people? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, super, thank you. So as both Ned and Provost Croson mentioned earlier, we had this discussion last week. So I'm going to go fairly quickly over this proposal. There were a few changes that were made since last week's meeting based on some of the conversations that we had done and subsequently. So the current status, we all were, as everybody knows, directed to attest to our vaccine status or our commitment to test appropriately by September 17th, so nearly 2 weeks ago. And as of today at 2 o'clock, I am very excited to say that we only have 9 faculty who have not yet attested. And so we're down to specific names and conversations at this point. But the question remains about what process should the university use to respond to those who do not attest or don't comply with this requirement. Just to reinforce the idea, this is not for staff members or unionized faculty. This is only for people who are covered under the faculty tenure policy and are non-unionized, because those other organizations or those other groups have different processes. So just a reminder, the governing process or governing policy for discipline for faculty is the faculty tenure policy, the Board of Regents policy. And when suspension or termination is being considered, the dean has to follow the guidance in section 14. This quote here is taken directly from section 14, which requires that a dean who is proposing discipline needs to consult with the tenured faculty of that academic unit before they would implement that discipline. And that is something that happens regularly. It is a requirement of this process. However, you see here as well that if the provost and the faculty senate approve the submission of those allegations to a different body, then they can do that instead of submitting those allegations and the proposed discipline to the tenured faculty of the unit. So what we're proposing is a COVID-19 vaccine attestation discipline advisory panel, where this would take place of the academic unit's tenured faculty review when advising the dean. And just to underscore the point that we are not deviating from or changing policy, we're simply implementing an option that is already existing in that policy. This panel we're proposing would have 5 faculty members, both tenure stream and contract, and from different units across the university. We believe that because there are only 9 faculty members who have not yet attested, and we now know a little bit more about what's going on with some of those faculty members. So, and I'm optimistic that a few more will attest without going through this process, that we only will need 1 panel, hopefully. And this panel would be selected from a list of Senate's that was provided by Senate staff of former members of the Senate Judicial Committee, former faculty panelists from the Office of Conflict Resolution, and then contract faculty members who have significant governance experience. So the idea is to make sure that people have had some experience in these kinds of considerations in the past. To also just want to underscore the former members of the SJC, because what we are also doing, as I'll talk about in just a minute, is the appeals process is still part of this process. So it's not the current members of the SJC who might be in a position to hear an appeal. The benefits of this approach: we would have a consistent response across the university. We would also hopefully be able to move quickly, which is important given that this is a public health concern. Faculty and units would not have to take on additional work, especially as they might relate to concerns about their peers' health. And then finally, we want to make sure that faculty governance remains involved in this, both through your decision today, whether or not to do this process, as well as through the appeals process through the Senate Judicial Committee, which would remain, that appeals process would remain unchanged. So this is a sort of an overview just to walk through what this would look like. Step 1, the conversation with the dean that has to happen. Step 2, the dean report and making recommendations. What we're proposing is to this different body, that is that institution-wide body, rather than to the faculty of that person's unit. In the box here, you see this is what the committee that we're proposing would actually do. That they would receive the comments from the faculty member in question and the dean. deliberate, get more information if they needed it, then write a report to the dean recommending or supporting a particular recommendation or suggesting that a different approach be considered. And then finally, again, the decision to appeal remains as part of this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Provost Croson, I believe, or who had a few other final comments.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So I did want to, maybe we'll let Ned go first and then I'll turn to the questions I got in advance. Is that all right?
Sounds good to me, if I presume it's okay with Chair Chomsky.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, I'm trying to do what I said in the orientation this morning. So I just want to reiterate a couple of things. I think they were here clear now, this time very clear, but just to say them again to make sure they're crystal clear. So this is not changing the tenure policy. It's just using a clause in it that applies to all faculty. And even though it's a tenure policy, it clearly applies to both tenure system or what's called regular faculty or contract faculty, what's term faculty in the faculty tenure policy. So both, so that's all faculty by that definition. As to the graphic that Vice Provost Roberts just went over, that's all accurate and that's all the usual process. So if we don't approve this, all that same process would happen with the tenured faculty of the unit. And if we approve this, then it just switches it to this special panel, but the process remains exactly the same. And then the recommendation from whichever panel back to the dean, it's still the dean's final decision. And then that's what a faculty member could appeal, but it's not the final decision of the panel. It's just a recommendation from the panel as to the discipline and or do they not follow the policy. And I think it was said again, but this is, we'll just reiterate one more time. It's only deals with matters pertaining to non-compliance with attestation, not doing it or forging it or not following it. It wouldn't apply to any other COVID things either, though, like not refusing the mask, which again, we've heard is rarely happening. All those other kind of COVID public health safety issues would still be the normal process, normal panels if it ever got to that. And so I think that's what I have, and I'll turn it back to Provost Croson for, I think, a few pre-submitted questions.
Wonderful, thank you. So we received 3 questions in advance from one individual. They were mostly focused on the consequences rather than the process. So I'm going to address them here, but I do want to reiterate that the vote today is not about the consequences, it's about the process for imposing the consequences. These questions are a little long, so instead of reading them, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but if the questioner is in the room and I can't quite tell, please feel free to correct me if I misstate your question. So the first was a suggestion about having those who didn't fill out the form just be tested weekly rather than imposing discipline. And we can certainly do that, but we do run into a problem that if the individual didn't fill out the form, and in that form where they would agree to be tested weekly, if we say you need to be tested weekly and they don't, it becomes much more difficult to impose discipline than if we said you had to fill out the form and they don't, or if they filled out the form and agreed to be tested weekly and then didn't. So again, I've got no objections to weekly testing for people who are unvaccinated. It just becomes much more challenging to, if that's the only consequence, or that's the consequence, it's much more challenging to impose that as a consequence, to monitor that, to impose consequences for not following that consequence. The second suggestion was a request that we should have similar consequences for employees and for students. I fully agree. As I think I said last time, we've been coordinating with the other employee groups and the student groups on the consequences. And so that's going to be a continued topic of conversation. And then the third question was, what are the parallel consequences for not doing things like the financial conflict of interest forms or other requirements? So I checked in with the compliance office. I'm told that they've gotten 100% compliance for the REPA form for more than 6 years now. So there's never been a disciplinary element. That said, this situation is different in 2 big ways. The first is that we have some additional urgency beyond just activity through the REPA, which is why we think that we're proposing this new path, because it will speed up the process. And second, of course, is that this decision around vaccinations and testing is a lot more politically charged than the financial disclosure. And so we think that running it through a panel as opposed to running it through one's peers of the tenured faculty in the department is gonna take off some of the charge there, some of the heat. So those are the 3 questions I got and some responses. But again, this vote is about the process that we're going to follow rather than about the consequences. That said, I'm happy to open the discussion and answer any questions that anyone has.
All right. I see people queuing up, so I will make an effort to do these in order myself. Jerry Cohen.
Thank you. So I'm Jerry Cohen. I'm a senator from CFANS, and I'm also a member of the Judicial Committee. And I have a vested interest in this from the Judicial Committee side. So I have a couple of questions. So I support this general concept because I think that consistency of discipline means that fewer cases will come to us. And the Judicial Committee is a very efficient process of imposing careful analysis of the tenure code, but high throughput is not our forte. And so I'd like to have the number of cases limited if we can. And I think consistency could come from a committee like this. What concerns me just a little bit, and maybe someone can answer this and calm me down in terms of my concern, is it goes to the dean from the committee back to the deans. And there is an inconsistency from dean to dean. I hate to say they're not all the same. And the question is, if they impose discipline, will it then go back to the office of the provost for review so that the discipline becomes consistent across the university? And basically what I'm asking is, when it comes to the Judicial Committee, who will be the respondent? Okay, so that's my question.
Yeah, great question. So, so the short answer is no, but. So we don't have a plan where it would come back to the provost, but I have had some anticipatory discussions with the deans about coming to a unified consequence, again, that's aligned with the consequences for the other groups, and they are all in accordance with that. So I am pretty confident that we will have consistency and consequences across colleges.
And you will monitor it, I hope?
Certainly, if there are any inconsistencies, I would hope to hear about them.
Thank you. Jen Goodnow.
Thank you. Jennifer Goodnow from the Morris Campus, FCC Senator. I support this independent of the answer to the question I'm about to ask, which is, I appreciate the clarification that this is only for the COVID-19 vaccination attestation. But I think it's possible we could end up with a booster shot attestation a couple months from now, or a new vaccine for COVID-19, whatever the next iteration is. Would this apply to all COVID-19 attestations in the future, or is this really just limited to the one that had the September deadline? Thank you.
That is a great question. So at the moment, we're limited to the September deadline. However, I will say that that attestation said that I'm fully vaccinated, which includes recommended boosters. So I think the booster question might be included here because it was included in September, not because it's a different process. Now, I think if there's a different, if there's a new vaccine for the Lambda variant, or if there's a different coronavirus that comes up that we all have to get vaccinated against, we might look to this as a precedent, but I don't think that the vote today would constrain us to do the same thing.
Thank you.
Will Jones.
Hi, I'm a faculty senator in CLA. I had a similar question as the previous one about sort of what the long-term ramifications of this could be. And I'm wondering if, more specifically, so this could become a model for future situations. My assumption is that our vote, that we are not voting to give any author. You said that it wouldn't constrain you, but on the flip side, I'm assuming that you would have to come back for another vote to implement anything like this in the future. And I guess, so that's a question, I guess, related to a comment. And I'm actually surprised to hear that we're implementing this policy for only 9 cases. And so it makes me think differently about the concerns about efficiency and overwork and consistency. I think this is a change. I get the point that this is not a change to the tenure policy, but it is an effective change to the way in which tenure is carried out in this particular case, right? And I think an important part of tenure, the spirit of tenure policy, is to leave decisions like this to the tenured faculty within a particular unit or discipline. So I think that's an important change, and I think we should acknowledge it. And I guess I'm wondering, given the small number of cases, is this warranted? Which I think is a dramatic change, and in principle, even if it is in in application small. So thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. So indeed, as I sort of answered to Jen, I would, if we had anything that's included in that September attestation, I think would be under this policy if we voted this way. And if there were a new attestation, then I would have to come back for a new iteration if we wanted it or not. I am also quite surprised and delighted that we only have 9 cases. At the time that we started this, we were thinking it would be a couple hundred. And as you might remember, we had plans for kind of multiple panels with different compositions, and it was kind of a much more elaborate structure. So far, so good. And again, if this group doesn't want to support this, I am perfectly fine with it. I kind of feel like there are some advantages, and that on net, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but you might disagree, and I'm okay with that.
Thank you. So I just want to thank those who've spoken till now, before now, identifying faculty senator from where you are. I didn't say that at the outset, but I appreciate that. And just a reminder for everybody to do that. Matthias Roth.
Yeah, thank you. Faculty senator in CLA. I also want to come back to this concern that was also raised in the previous meeting, that this is a lot of resources and labor on something that has practically a minimal effect when it comes to the pandemic. And from that back circling, I mean, my sense is we are doing this only because the policy in place is actually very weak. So many of my colleagues who I represent still ask the question, why does the university not have a stronger policy in place? Proof of vaccination. If you are not able to do this, requirement of testing. If you are not willing to do this, removal from any indoor setting. It seems very straightforward. Other institutions are doing this. And none of the people I spoke to actually think that this is only because you trust us so much. So I really want to ask the question again, what is the reason that we don't have a stronger policy and in fact debating about something that is a third order problem?
Great, thank you for the question. So I know there's going to be a further discussion about the particular aspects of that policy. And while I'm happy to engage in that discussion, I'm not sure this is the right venue for that. I know there was some discussion this morning about faculty senate, university senate. I don't want to get myself in the middle of that, or whatever you all decide. I will say that at the time that we rolled this attestation out, we heard very loudly the call that there needed to be consequences for not doing it. And it was really in response to that call that we started looking at what could the consequences be, what would the process be. I should also say that while there are only 9 faculty who come under the tenure code, there are a couple hundred employees more generally who have not attested. And so I think it would be important for, again, you don't have to vote for this particular policy, this particular path change, but it's going to be important for us to make sure that we are following up on those 9 in order to make sure that our staff and our unionized faculty also get followed up on.
Thank you. Jason Kerwin.
So I just wanted to follow on to the comment that, you know, this same procedure could.
Sorry, can you just identify your college just for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. Jason Kerwin, faculty senator from CFANS.
Thanks.
Someone made the point that, you know, this is a big expansion of, you know, it's a big change to how we enforce the tenure code. But I think it would be completely reasonable to do something very similar for any other situation where faculty are legally required to fill out a form. The university is legally required to have them fill out this form. And, you know, and people are not doing it. So even though nobody is doing this currently with the REPA form, it would be good to have a procedure for that. And I understand that we're not voting on something like that right now, but I think that the precedent that this sets is a completely reasonable one, right? That there should be consequences for refusing to fill out this form that is required as part of your job. So I support this resolution and I support the precedent that it sets.
Great, thank you.
Gopalan, not a third.
Yeah, so I would take my name is Gopalan Nadathur. I'm a CSC senator, and I'm also the chair of the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee. And some of what I'm going to say is basically because of the hat that I wear. Okay, so I would take a contrary viewpoint to the last speaker. That is that I would be extremely hesitant to make this a precedent-setting vote. Right, I'm supportive of it on this occasion, but I really do think that we have to think very carefully about it. And I should also voice some of my concern that is similar to what Will Jones voiced. You know, they're doing something for 9 people, right, which presumably we can manage with the consistency and so on using normal procedures. So should we be doing anything that could potentially be viewed as precedent setting, right, for the future? It's a challenge, you know, from the perspective of academic freedom and tenure. From that perspective, I think it can end up being harmful, right? So this is something that I would sort of urge caution on, right? Even though in this particular instance, I might be in support of the particular attestation proposal that's put forward.
Great, thank you.
All right, Karen Sue Tessig.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Karen Sue Tessig. I'm a faculty senator from CLA. I just want to emphasize the points that have just been made by Will and Gopalan. And also some of the other comments. I think it's great that we're only talking about 9 people. And if we were talking about 100 people, I might feel really differently, because I also agree that there should be consequences. But we sort of went down this path thinking that we might be talking about a lot of people and that there should be consequences. And so the premise upon which we went down this path is no longer the reality. So it does sort of feel like, why make the change when I appreciate all the work that went into getting us here and the fact that we might have been talking about a lot more people, but since we're not, it does feel like it wouldn't be overwhelming to deal with it with our usual procedures. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to vote because of that, but I just want to, put that out there.
Great, thank you. I see that Rebecca has her hand up. I don't know if she has a response to that particular comment, but Chair Chomsky, I'll let you decide how to move next.
Yeah, if Vice Provost Ropers, if you have something on the particular points, that would be fine. Fill in and then we'll go on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to sort of play out how this would actually work, because even though it's only 9 people, there are 9 people who are in different departments. Some of our departments have, a small number of faculty members. Some of our departments have more than 50 faculty members. What would be required is that the dean would need to bring together all of the faculty members in a given unit. Let's take history as one of our big ones, or chemistry. And each of those people would need to weigh in on the recommendation of the dean and make a decision. So even though we're only talking about 9 faculty members, well, first they would have to find a time to do that, to have that conversation. Second, they would have to review whatever materials are put forward. Third, they would have to write a report. Hopefully they would figure out how to do this efficiently, but technically the way these usually work is that everybody puts their eyes on the report because it's really a recommendation that comes from the unit and all the faculty in the unit. So even though it's only 9 people, I think it will delay our process and moving forward, and it will take a lot of faculty time that I'm not sure if this is the best use of faculty time. At this point. One of the things that I've heard much about in the pandemic is how stressed people are and how much people have on their plate. So that's one of the things that's been in my mind moving forward.
Thank you. Colleen Manchester.
Thank you. Colleen Manchester, Vice Chair and faculty member from the Carlson School. I think there's been, just wanted to add that a lot of focus on the number 9, but I just want to remind the senators that this process would also be for violations that come to light, which we don't know what that number is at this point.
Thank you. Gopalan. I see none others, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I just, maybe I should sort of phrase my concern slightly differently. Can we take it that, can we be reassured that this is not going to become a precedent-setting event?
So I guess I'm not sure what precedent-setting means in this case. The way that this proposal is written and the way I understand we're voting on it, it's just for this attestation in September. That attestation in September might have some legs, right? It's not just what happens in September, but it's just for that September attestation. Now, it's a precedent because we've done it before, but it's not a precedent in that it hasn't been approved for use in other settings. So maybe I need a little clarity on what you mean by precedent here.
So I'm just worried that it's going to become a model for something else, 6 months down the line and so on. And that would worry me really, at least while I'm wearing the hat of the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee Chair. Right?
And so I will just remind about the process from the beginning. If the provost asked for this again for some other policy, it would be up to the Faculty Senate to discuss, debate, and decide what to do about it. So it's not a precedent that can be followed without the Faculty Senate agreeing to it in terms of the process of what's required here. I'm going to call on Carl Flink because Jerry, you've spoken already, so I want to give other people the chance if possible.
Thanks, Carol. Carl Flink from the dance program, member of the FCC. I agree that the emphasis on the number 9 is a little bit of a mirage, especially because I think having a system-wide approach allows us to create consistency in decision-making so that, if we're in the various departments, notwithstanding the comments of differences of deans and things of that nature, I think this process allows us to create one where there's more consistency in how these decisions look and how they're determined. So I'm in support of continuing with this approach.
Thank you. I think we have about 8 minutes left, just giving some sense of timing. Jonathan Sachs.
Hi, everyone. I was hoping that I'm Jonathan Sachs, I'm a CSE senator. If one of my colleagues who spoke to concerns on this slippery slope could articulate an example of that for me. What is this that we're concerned might happen if we set this precedent, for example?
If someone has a comment about that, you could raise your hand. In the meantime, maybe I'll let you think about that and call on Phil Bowman.
Phil Bowman, College of Science and Engineering and FCC member. I just really want to emphasize how this comment from Provost Croson resonated with me, is that faculty are not alone here. I mean, there's And I remind you of last year when we voted about salary reductions. That had a huge impact. Civil service and P&A looked at us. And so I do think that as we're making this vote today, we should also really think of how that will be seen by other employee groups on campus. And so to that end, I strongly support this proposal.
Carol, I'll take a stab at the precedent-setting comment. I think, maybe the most obvious one is we can predict that there may be future pandemic situations, different from COVID. And if we use this example as that's just the go-to that we default to, that's a concern. Rather than if we're going, every time one of these kind of unprecedented events or arises, we restart the debate and have a discussion about how we're going to approach it, rather than just defaulting to a precedent that was set in 2021 in regards to COVID. So it's just with precedent, you start having situations where, does this look a lot like where we were, and should we just go back to that, to what we did before, rather than having the full robust discussion as we're having right now, if that makes sense, Jonathan.
All right, so having passed over Jerry Cohen for a while now, I will call on you. Thanks for understanding, trying to make sure everyone who speaks.
I just wanted to talk about precedent and tenure code. So first of all, I'd like to encourage everyone to read the tenure code at least once a week. And the second, you will find this is consistent with the tenure code. So we don't talk about precedent here because it is a process which is actually laid out as an alternative to chain of command methods for dealing with a situation. And so the tenure code defines this process, which we're in the process of approving. It isn't a precedent because the tenure code specifies that this is a possibility. So I keep hearing, laying out a new precedent or something. It's not. It's part of the tenure code. Read it. It's there. And it's a good idea because the concept of having multiple deans making multiple decisions and sending that process up through the Senate Judicial Committee is going to be somewhat chaotic, especially for a new process. And so conformity is a good idea. It's good for the faculty that are going to be subjected to it. It's good for those of us who have to then judge on it. It's a basically good idea. And it's in the tenure code. And I would not support it if it wasn't in the tenure code, because we should live and die by that tenure code. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. So last comment from Will Jones.
Hi, sorry again to come on again. I just want to, on this issue of precedent, well, I think the previous comments are well taken. And I see the reason for this. I'm leaning toward voting for it. But I do want to say that we've already raised examples of precedent, and people have referred to the conflict of interest form, to the question of the sexual harassment training, right? These things that are all, that are required of faculty, that, there should be some penalty for not complying with, are all similar things in which we could make an argument that there's an urgency, that the lack of compliance could burden the units. And so I think it's easy to imagine that this could be applied as a model for other things. And that's, I think that's my concern about the precedent. And I think could have, could have a very broad impact and sort of create a loophole, as Jerry's correct, is not a loophole actually in the tenure policy. It's provided within the tenure policy, but it's a loophole that I think could potentially undermine the principles of tenure.
All right, having time run out on the item and no further hands anyway, it is time to vote on the motion. The motion is to approve the provost's proposal to create a special panel to review cases of faculty misconduct related to the COVID-19 vaccine and testing attestation requirement pursuant to Section 14.1 of the Board of Regents Policy Faculty Tenure. A simple majority is required. Chris, can you initiate the poll? And only faculty senators, others may be at the meeting, only faculty senators to vote, please.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 94 ayes, 16 nays, and 1 abstention, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. We still have a few items left. Item 7 is approval of a number of educational policies. There was some question raised at the end of the University Senate meeting about connections to those policies. They have all been reviewed by the Senate Committee on Educational Policy and the Faculty Consultative Committee. They've reviewed and approved these with no significant concerns noted. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. Chris, can you initiate the poll again, only for faculty senators?
Again, we'll give about 10 more seconds. And last call. There being 81 ayes, 1 nay, and 22 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 8 concerns old business. There is no old business for the Faculty Senate. Item 9 concerns new business for the Faculty Senate. Note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And I will just note, as was indicated at the outset, we will reconvene I believe we will reconvene the Faculty Senate, a special Faculty Senate meeting. Next week, there will be information sent out about that. And so I expect to see you, many of you, or all of you back then. Host, please, Chris, please initiate the poll for adjournment.
Give about 10 more seconds. Last call. Being 110 ayes and no nays or abstentions, that motion prevails.
I have to say, even on a motion for adjournment, I don't think we've ever gone 100%, so I appreciate that. The meeting is adjourned, and we'll see many of you back soon.